In August of 1994, Major League Baseball halted its season due to the players going on strike. The season never resumed, and so there was no 1994 World Series champion. But one of the best teams that season was the Montreal Expos, who held a record of 74-40 when the season halted. And 10 years later, the Expos left Montreal for Washington, D.C., becoming the Nationals. Ever since, fans have blamed the strike for the Expos' departure. But did the 1994 strike actually kill the Montreal Expos? Before the strike, the Montreal Expos were the best team in baseball. From June 1st until the day of the strike, Montreal went 46-18. Their squad included 5 All-Stars: Moises Alou, Will Cordero, Darren Fletcher, Marquise Grissom, and Ken Hill. Also on the team was a young Pedro Martinez, and they were managed by Felipe Alou. Because of their success, the Expos were well on their way to break many of their own attendance records, and were certainly the World Series favorites heading into the final 2 months of the season. But then, the strike happened. Before we get into the strike itself though, it is necessary to talk about the Expos' ownership history, since a club's ownership is immensely important in baseball. Expos fans were adamant about keeping the team owned by Canadians, but for the entirety of their existence, the Expos had trouble finding local ownership who could just pour money into the club. Charles Bronfman owned the team from 1968 to 1991, and he was Canadian. He absolutely adored the franchise, and many would describe him as an owner that they wish their team had. In June of 1991, the franchise was sold to Claude Brochu along with other Canadian investors. But shareholders were upset that Brochu was making a majority of the decisions. So, in 1999, he sold his stakes to Jeffrey Loria, a New Yorker, who appointed David Sampson as the team's executive vice president. Then in 2002, Loria sold the team to Major League Baseball, and for the final 3 years of the Expos' existence, they were run by the league itself. As Alexander Pratt put it in reference to Brochu's tenure, the daily drama of baseball had transformed into business drama, and that is rare. We saw the egos, we saw the quarrels. There was more drama going on than you might see at a high school dance. This sentiment could also be applied to Loria's tenure as well. Now, let's get back to the strike. The main issue that caused the strike in '94 is actually an issue that still persists, and many people will say it will cause a lockout in 2027, a salary cap. Owners assume that if you put a limit on how much teams can spend, it will promote parity, and small market teams won't get shoved to the bottom of the league simply because they can't afford to keep up. The proof of this now is that the other 3 major North American sports have them. But in 1994, the NFL was starting its first year of a cap, the NBA only had a cap for a decade, and the NHL didn't have one at all. And the problem that the owners faced is that the MLBPA is arguably the strongest players' association in all of sports. Everybody knew that the players would never, and still will never, agree to a salary cap. Thus, they went on strike. When it was clear that an agreement between the players and owners wouldn't be reached in a timely manner, the postseason and World Series were canceled, and created the biggest what-if in baseball history. What if the strike didn't happen, and the Montreal Expos won the 1994 World Series? And many do blame the strike for the Expos' demise. But the strike happened in 1994, and the Expos didn't leave Montreal until 2004, a full decade later. So of course, there were some other problems that caused the Expos to move. The Expos had an absolute fire sale after the strike. Ken Hill was traded, Marquise Grissom was traded, John Wetland was traded, and Larry Walker was allowed to leave as a free agent. Walker wasn't even offered a contract following 1994. He said himself that he didn't leave, he was let go, and that he had no other choice but to go somewhere else. Tom Verducci, a writer for Sports Illustrated, said, "They not only traded their best players, they got very little back in return. This is the ultimate fire sale of Major League Baseball." Serge Touchette, whose name I am confident I am not pronouncing correctly, was a writer who covered the Expos and MLB for nearly 30 years. He said, "Lots of people said that the strike had killed the Expos in 1994. Yeah, but the fire sale played a part, because the fire sale killed our hope. And when they take away your hope, you stop being a fan." Aside from the fire sale, an issue that plagued the Expos for nearly their entire existence was that their stadium was definitely subpar. And for some people, that would be putting it lightly. There were rain delays at the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, which usually wouldn't be a problem in baseball, but the stadium had a roof. So, to generate revenue, Expos ownership decided to build their own stadium. And when teams own their stadiums, they generate a lot of money. But a lot of stadiums use some amount of public funding to be built, and the city of Montreal in 1999 refused to spend any public money, as the city was not in the best financial situation. Thus, the stadium was shot down, and the problem of a bad venue for the Expos continued and would never be solved. But as mentioned earlier, in 1999, the team was sold to Jeffrey Loria, and Loria made David Sampson his right-hand man. If you ask a lot of Expos fans, these two killed the Expos. Loria and Sampson said that Expos games wouldn't even be broadcast on television, and they cut off local TV deals. And for sports teams, television rights are crucial for income. They also fired Felipe Alou, who was arguably the face of the Expos. So to many of the fans and the media, it really felt like Loria bought the team simply to sabotage it and relocate. Jeff Blair, a former baseball beat reporter for the Montreal Gazette, said, "It was so predictable. Jeffrey Loria wanted to join the club of baseball owners. He just wanted to buy a baseball team. I think he looked at the Expos and thought, if they build a ballpark for me in Montreal, great. Montreal's a great city. If they don't want to build a ballpark for me, well, see ya." Loria gradually bought out the other shares of the Expos from local shareholders, taking his stake in the club from 24% to 92%. The Montreal Expos were almost entirely his. And in 2002, Loria bought the Florida Marlins and sold the Expos. Montreal was placed under a guardianship by MLB itself. The team was owned by the league for 3 seasons, and the 29 other owners were basically babysitting the Expos all the way until they moved to Washington on September 29, 2004. In every sport, a team's relocation always comes down to at least one of 2 things: money or a new stadium. For the Montreal Expos, it was both. The '94 strike wasn't necessarily impactful because of how much it cost the team's immediate finances, but how much it prevented the team from accomplishing. With a 74-40 record when the strike happened, one could argue that the amount of money the Expos would have made if they continued that pace would have been able to keep them in Montreal. However, a World Series win for the Expos in '94 is only hypothetical. Just because a team is the best in the regular season does not mean they'll win the World Series. Who's to say that the 67-46 Chicago White Sox wouldn't have won the World Series that year, or the 70-43 Yankees? So let's answer the question definitively. Did the 1994 strike kill the Montreal Expos? Not directly. The strike didn't cause poor ownership, didn't cause an awful stadium, didn't cause poor attendance, and didn't start the poor finances of the team. What people need to learn is that when a team relocates, it never comes down to a single reason. But maybe the truth is this: nobody really killed the Montreal Expos. Everyone just failed at saving them from dying.